So it's important to go back to this, right? So a couple different things. So we're taking in too much iron, right? The added iron via enriched foods, supplements, and our water, among other things, right? So too much iron, as well as things that make inflammation worse, like PUFAs, like excess sugar, hydrogenated oils, all of that, as well as all of the, and that added on, as well as taking away all of the things that would keep those things in check. So when you look downstream from the liver, an overloaded liver, what are some of the organs that have a thing, a protein, that would make it more likely to take in iron? Maybe something like hepcidin, right? So beta cells were given special tools. They have special responsibilities, right, with that ability to use insulin. So those tools, i.e. hepcidin, that made it able to handle the insulin, glucose, iron capabilities, give it specific responsibilities when it comes to handling a volatile iron, right? Because we know iron's important, it's reactive, but it is a pro-oxidant. So if it is not handled correctly, there are dire consequences, right? So what happens in a state of iron dysregulation when the beta cells have hepcidin, and they're, do they know what to do? And what happens if there's too much iron in the body, where, like I was just mentioning, that excess iron starts to run the show? So hepcidin now becomes, which was once a gift, right? It's what gives beta cells the power to use glucose or have its insulin do what it needs to do, right? That is such an important part of our body's ability to use energy. If our pancreas didn't have hepcidin and it wasn't able to connect the dots between glucose and iron, we don't use energy as efficiently, right? It's really important. But that same hepcidin that allows for that properly mobilized iron to meet the energy demands of the cell can also become a bit of a problem in states of excess iron. Because what can hepcidin also do? It can release, but it can also lock that iron in its place. And we'll talk about how that can be an issue. Because if you remember, if there's too much iron, hepcidin sequesters that excess iron into storage to make sure that it is not just being released into the system where it can just be an oxidizing terror. This is good when the liver is doing the sequestering, right? Because the liver is equipped with all of the tools to store iron, make sure that it's bound and not doing anything it's not supposed to. But when that liver gets to a point where it starts to spill into other organs, the beta cells now all of a sudden, with the blessing of hepcidin, now they have the tools to take on more iron than they're ready for, right? So now that extra iron that the liver can't hold gets sequestered into the beta cells. And at first, right, the beta cells have some means of handling small doses, right? Transient. It's just a minor mechanism to make sure that that iron is held onto before it can be released as that inflammation is taken care of. But when you think of all the things that are causing inflammation in our body, the excess iron in and of itself, as well as the other pro-oxidant aspects of the things that we're eating, hepcidin starts to lock iron in place as part of its protective mechanism against inflammation. So if you remember, too much hepcidin leads to anemia of inflammation. And this is a safety mechanism that on paper looks amazing. And there's like this minor detail, this minor caveat at the bottom that says, oh, by the way, in states of iron excess, it may make things worse. And no one has ever read that. So unbound iron makes inflammation worse. We know that. Hepcidin thinks that it's helping by taking in that unbound iron in the cell in a state of inflammation, right? So our body's inflamed. Hepcidin goes, oh, like, if you have a kitchen fire, your kitchen's on fire, you've got like flammable things. You're like, oh my, this iron is so flammable, I'm gonna like tuck this away. And in theory, that helps, right? If we just have, if we're sick, if we have an infection or something in our body, and we have all of these antibodies causing an inflammatory response, our body intentionally tries to mitigate the inflammation by taking any extra iron into the cell temporarily to avoid it making the initial inflammatory response worse. Okay? The thing is, if the source of the inflammation is iron itself, when the hepcidin goes, oh, let me protect us from this inflammation and draw this iron in, it's making things worse. So that extra retained iron leads to an inflammatory response within the cell. So now all this iron is locked in the beta cell. And it's just causing havoc. It is unbound. The beta cell does not have the means to properly bind the iron to make it not oxidize everything. And over time, that leads to cell death or ferroptosis. Ferroptosis is just a fancy word to say cell death by iron.